When it comes time to retire, many New Yorkers dream of a warm, sunny state like Florida. In fact, the Sunshine State is the top destination for many New Yorkers planning to retire to another state. It's an affordable state relative to New York with plenty to do to keep you busy. Hey there, my name is Chichi Aguoji and I'm a New York-based realtor specializing in helping seniors and retirees sell their homes and find the best locations to retire. So if you're thinking of retiring to Florida, here are 10 items that you'll want to think about before you make your move. Number 1, wildlife. Now, compared to New York, Florida has a lot of wildlife, and each of these has its own respective season. Everything from alligators to mosquitoes to sand spurs to my least favorite, love bugs. Now, these creatures are called love bugs because they're actually mating in air. So they're flying around and they attach themselves to each other because they're mating. The good news is they don't sting, they don't bite, they don't spread any disease or anything of that sort. The bad news is they're flying around in swarms and they're leaving these white residue all over your vehicles. They attach themselves to you. I mean, they can get into your mouth. It's just utterly disgusting. So whether or not love bugs appear and how much love bugs appear in any given year has everything to do with how much rain Florida gets. But all I have to say to these love bugs is please get a room, because honestly, when they're around, it looks like a plague hit Florida. As far as New York is concerned, we got no love bugs, no alligators, we don't have any of that stuff, but we do have snow, which Florida, of course, does not. Number 2, rainy season. So every year, Florida experiences what's called rainy season, and this period of time really lasts between the months of May and October. So Florida's rainy season really comes in 3 phases. Phase 1 usually takes place between May and June, and during these periods, you'll have severe thunderstorm, damaging winds, and heavy rainfall. So phase 2 usually takes place between July and September. Now during this period, the chances of severe thunderstorm greatly diminishes. However, there's still a high likelihood of severe rain and heavy flooding. So phase 3 is really known as the cool down phase, and in this phase, you're still less likely to experience severe thunderstorms, but you still might experience heavy rainfall due to cold fronts or tropical systems. And on average, Florida does get about 14 more inches of rain every year when compared to New York. However, one thing that's the same in both states is that you will require flood insurance if your home is located in what's called or what's considered to be a flood zone. So while Florida is known for its rainy season, it's also known as being the thunder capital of the nation. And that's because Florida experiences more lightning strikes than any other state in the country. In fact, lightning in Florida is so prevalent that public spaces such as parks, pools, even schools, all have lightning alarms to let you know when lightning has struck or is about to strike, to allow you time to go and seek safety so that you don't get hurt. Florida is actually one of the few places in all of America that you can be 100% guaranteed you will see lightning in any given year. So according to a recent study done by Vasela, Florida experiences an average of 3,500 lightning flashes per day and 1.2 million lightning flashes per year. In 2021, Florida averaged 223 lightning strikes per square mile, and the town of Geneva averaged or experienced 857 lightning strikes per square mile that same year. Now, with more lightning strikes comes more deaths from lightning strikes. Since 2016, 400 people have reportedly died after being struck by lightning in the state of Florida. So if you see lightning in Florida, run for cover, seek shelter, don't look up. Now, in New York, on the other hand, we're not really known for our lightning strikes. We might be known to duck or run for cover when other things happen, but definitely not lightning. Number 4, the off season. Now, during the peak summer months, Florida experiences its hottest temperatures of the year. During this period, tourists and snowbirds alike flee Florida in order to go and seek cooler temperatures. This time, Florida can really become a ghost town, all right, because there's no one there because it's just too hot. So there are some retirement communities that will have lots of recreational activities in order to keep you engaged and keep you active. However, it does not mean that your favorite restaurant might not be closed during the off season. Now, when it comes to New York, there's no such thing as an off season. In fact, New York is known as the city that never sleeps. So the only time people really leave New York is when something catastrophic happens, such as COVID or 9/11. For the most part, people are flocking to New York in droves, no matter the weather. So this is different in Florida. In Florida, tourists and snowbirds, they like to escape the state when it gets too hot, and then they go back when it's a little cooler. Whereas in New York, people are always coming to stay in New York. Quick reminder, if you enjoyed the video so far, feel free to like it or feel free to subscribe, and let's keep going. Number 5, public transportation. So the big question is, will you need a car when you get to Florida? And the answer is you most likely will need a car, and this is because the state of Florida as a whole does not really invest in public transportation. And so this duty is left to the cities or the local municipalities. And what this might mean is that access to public transportation or even the quality of public transportation is going to vary from city to city, because it's up to these cities to kind of close the gap and get their residents from point A to point B. Now, some parts of Florida do offer rail service. So you have the Sunrail in Central Florida, and then you have the Tri-Rail in South Florida. Issue is, if you were to take these trains, it might take you twice as long to get to your final destination as opposed to just getting in your car and driving there yourself. Miami is in fact the only city in Florida that has somewhat of an equivalent to what New Yorkers know as a subway. So Miami has a metro rail system, and this system has 23 stations and its tracks run about 25 miles. So one side effect of not having a viable public transportation system is what happens when the population increases. So we know that Florida's population between 2010 and 2020 has gone up by about 3 million people. So when you add 3 million people to the population, without a public transportation system, allowing people to get to their destinations, that means that you're going to have a lot more cars on the road, right? Now, a lot more cars on the road is going to lead to more traffic. More traffic is going to lead to more pollution, and more pollution leads to, you get the idea. So it's not something that's really to the benefit of Floridians to not have a government that's developing a public transportation system. So again, just something to think about long term if you do plan to retire to Florida. Florida as of today might look very different in terms of air quality, in terms of population density, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Now, New York, on the other hand, is the largest metropolitan in the US, and so of course with that comes the largest subway system in the US. The local government in New York is actually working towards trying to deter people from driving and actually pushing them towards using more forms of public transportation. And they're doing so by implementing something called congestion pricing, which is supposed to take effect in 2023. The idea being that during peak periods where there's a lot of traffic in Lower Manhattan, it might cost anywhere from double or even 3 times the price for you to drive in Lower Manhattan. And so they're encouraging folks to use types of public transportation as opposed to being in your cars and increasing pollutants in the air. Now, New York would be the first state in the nation to implement this if they do move forward with this, but you could imagine that if it's successful, other states are going to follow suit, and other boroughs within the 5 boroughs would also follow suit as well. So when it comes to public transportation, New York definitely takes the cake on this one. Number 6. Home insurance. So something to keep in mind if you are considering retiring to Florida from New York is that home insurance costs are extremely high. There is a home insurance crisis going on in Florida as we speak. There are 18 property insurers that are either fleeing the state completely, in liquidation, or no longer writing any new business whatsoever. Now, in May of 2022, the governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, did sign a reform bill, with the intent to help put an end to these increased false claims. Unfortunately, we've yet to see this bill take an impact or have any effect on these inflated claims. So prices are still expected to continue to rise in the near future, but hopefully in the far future, we do see a turnaround. Just so you know, just for your records, the average home insurance premium in the state of Florida is about $4,200. This is compared to an average annual premium of about $1,700 in the state of New York. Number 7, the people. Let's talk about the lovely people in the lovely state of Florida. So, how are Florida people? They're interesting, to say the least. Okay, do this exercise for me, right? Go on Google, after you watch this video, of course, but go on Google and just type in weird news in and see what Google autofills. I mean, if it autofills Florida, doesn't that say enough about what's going on in the state of Florida? There's a lot of weird stuff that happen in the state of Florida. And who does these weird things? The people in the state of Florida. I mean, YouTube has entire channels dedicated to reporting weird news in Florida. Miami Herald has an entire section called Weird, which outlines weird stuff going on in Florida. So that just gives you a sense of how people view the state of Florida, how people view the people who live in the state of Florida. And so you might be saying to yourself, like, what kind of stuff is being done? Like, what's happening? And it's the kind of things that just either leaves you shaking your head and going, only in Florida? Like this, for instance. Or this. And yes, it's true that Florida does have its fair share of transplants. So, you know, the argument could be made that it's the transplants who are doing all this weird activity. But no, we know the truth. It's the Floridians. And the Floridians know it's the Floridians. It's the residents that are doing all of this weird stuff in Florida. So just keep in mind and be aware that there's going to be a heightened sense of interest or interesting activity taking place in Florida if you do decide to move from New York to Florida. Now, this does not mean that New York is not without its weird folk. We do have some. However, Florida still takes the cake on this, okay? Florida wins out on New York in terms of its people. Number 8. Humidity. One thing that most people don't consider before they move from New York to Florida is just how humid Florida gets. So there's something called the dew point temperature, which actually measures the amount of moisture in the air. And according to this chart, when you measure the amount of moisture in Florida's air, it's oppressive. You know, Florida's dew point temperature ranges from 65 to 75. Whereas in New York's dew point temperature in the summer months actually ranges from about 60 to 64. So that's very different. And that's probably why you'll see a lot of people who, when they do retire from New York to Florida, they end up just staying inside the whole time, running the AC just so they're comfortable. When it's too humid, they're indoors. When it's sunny and it's cool, then they venture outside. So just be prepared for that. You may not be able to enjoy the outdoors as often as you might like because it will be too humid and it will be oppressive for you to go outside in Florida. Florida is actually the most humid state in America. So if you do decide to retire in Florida and you want to venture out, despite it being humid, just be prepared to have really frizzy hair or really foggy glasses, because that will be the norm in Florida. Number 9, low water quality. So another thing to keep in mind if you're retiring from New York to Florida is that the water quality in the state of Florida is not on par with the water quality in the state of New York. So 90% of Florida's water comes from these underground aquifers. And an aquifer is effectively just porous rock, and since these rocks are porous, they can allow the flow of contaminants to get through them. So you have contaminants that are kind of flowing through what's supposed to be water that you're drinking. Florida's water is so questionable that in 2017, the National Resources Defense Council actually did a study where they tested water samples all across the nation, and Florida's water samples show that they have the second worst water quality in America. So this was, what, 5 years ago? So I don't know if that's changed since then, but I would imagine it would take a lot longer for you to make sure that you have pure drinking water in your state. So keep in mind, water quality in Florida is definitely not of par or on par with the state of New York. So if you're wondering what can happen to you if you end up drinking Florida water on a regular basis, well, you can develop gastrointestinal issues, you can develop cancer, you may begin to lose your hair. So if you do want to drink the water, just recommend boiling it. If you don't want to drink the water, just stick to bottled water. In the event that you are curious about the water quality in New York, what makes it so good? So New York's water, 90% of New York's water actually comes from the Catskill Mountains, and it flows through various reservoirs and tunnels and aqueducts, but it's tested about 900 times a day from 1,200 different sampling sites. So people are constantly watching and constantly kind of making sure that the water quality in the state is one of the best. So number 10 thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about retiring to Florida is that Florida has a melting pot of driving styles. Now, this is coupled with the fact that there are some interesting people, interesting residents that live in the state, but you want to keep in mind that there are also lots of transplants and tourists that come down to visit. And oftentimes these tourists or these transplants may not know the roads, may not be familiar with where they're going, and so they may just swerve in front of you, or they may forget to put their turning signal on. All of these add to the fact that you have a melting pot of diverse driving styles, and it can really lead to a lot of frustration for anyone who takes the road if you're in Florida. So driving in Florida is a bit of a crapshoot because of the diverse population that lives there, but it's also a bit of a crapshoot because of the way its highways were built. There are some highways in Florida that are actually known as malfunction junction, just because they were not designed with safety being a forethought or with safety being a priority. And so people tend to just kind of drive and do what they want on those highways. New York, on the other hand, doesn't really have this issue. I would say outside of Manhattan, you're not really seeing too many or too much diversity. I think people that live in New York either take the subway or they're driving in their home neighborhoods where everyone tends to be familiar with the roads. And anyone who is in Manhattan is either walking or taking a taxi, and a taxi driver is definitely going to be, or should be, familiar with the road. So you don't really see this mishmash of driving styles in New York like you would in Florida. Okay, so I have a bonus reason for you. Something else that you want to consider before you decide to retire to Florida from New York is the fact that Florida experiences something called red tide. Now, red tide is an occurrence that happens, and it's because of industrialization as well as I would say a combination of industrialization and climate change. So effectively, it stems from algae in the ocean releasing this toxic waste, the byproduct that kills marine life. And what happens is when the fish or the marine life, when they're dead, they wash up all on the shore. And the smell is just overbearing. And it really does engulf, I think, whatever is within a 20-mile radius. In the past, red tide would only last for a few weeks before natural environmental processes would kind of either get rid of the fish or wash the fish back into the ocean, and the smell would kind of dissipate. But now red tide lasts for months, and it's just anyone with any kind of respiratory issues, or if you have anyone in your family that has like asthma, it makes it really, really difficult to breathe. Your eyes get watery if you go outside, and you can imagine any of the restaurants or any of the beachfront areas, they're closed. They have to shut down shop because there's no one who's going to sit on the beach and breathe in the smell of dead fish all day while you're eating. It's just completely overbearing. So keep this in mind. that red tide is an occurrence, and it does happen in Florida, unfortunately. And so it's not for the entire calendar year, but it might be something that would prevent you from enjoying your time outdoors. And so you should know and be informed that this is something that takes place in the state of Florida. Now, luckily, New York does not have red tide, so there's no direct equivalent compared to the state of Florida. But, sometimes the sanitation workers in the summer months do forget to pick up the trash or may not pick up the trash as frequently. And the smell does wave through the air, and it does cause you to want to escape. It also does cause respiratory issues, and it might cause your eyes to water. So there is that happens in the state of New York. But luckily, we do not experience red tide. All right, that's it for this video. If after watching this video, you are still excited about moving to Florida and you are still dead set on retiring to Florida, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect you with one of our partnering agents in the state. In the meantime, since you're so set on your move, you want to check out my other video, which explains why inflation in Florida is so high. That's coming up next. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something new, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.